All right. Well, Nando, we have some thoughts about the election, how it went down, how Joe Biden campaigned. So I'll go ahead and share my decode with you all. It's all about how Democrats have learned all the wrong lessons, and we should be concerned about that. So now that Joe Biden is the person who won the presidential election, it's been finally announced by all the major networks. He has beat Donald Trump. Donald Trump has not been reelected. But here's the issue. Joe Biden won by razor-thin margins in some of these key battleground states. And it was certainly too close for comfort for me, too close for comfort for everyone who was paying attention to the election on election day. In fact, I went to bed that night thinking that Joe Biden was definitely going to lose, and I was pretty furious at how the Democratic establishment propped him up. But luckily, he did win, although, again, with razor-thin margins in key battleground states. Now, in the age of the Lincoln Project, unfortunately, the Democratic Party has morphed into something that does not represent what the American people need and what the American people want. And I think that was abundantly clear in the way that Joe Biden campaigned. Now, look, the common argument that we've heard by these well-paid media pundits is that, well, we have a race problem in this country. And to be sure, we do have a race problem in this country. But racism cannot be the only thing that explains why Donald Trump came so close to getting reelected. I think that unfortunately puts the onus on the electorate and prevents any type of important in-depth analysis of our candidates. And we do need to take a look at Joe Biden, what he campaigned on, and why it is that he came so close to losing to a candidate who has been a complete and utter disaster during a pandemic. I mean, we have more than 237,000 Americans dead as a result of Donald Trump bungling his response to coronavirus. And the fact that Joe Biden came so close to losing, I think, communicates something that we need to talk about. So again, common argument that we've heard over and over again is that voters in America are racist, and that's what it boils down to. Now, I want to be clear in that Trump's racism and racist rhetoric certainly wasn't enough to turn these voters off. But I don't think that is the reason why all of these people ended up voting for Donald Trump. In fact, Donald Trump gained a considerable amount of support among minority voters. If we take a look at Black Trump voters, if you look at 2016, about 8% of Black voters accounted for the votes that Donald Trump was able to bring in. In 2020, that number jumped 4% to 12%. So 2016, 8%, 2020, 12% of the Black vote. If you break it down by gender, and honestly, this was pretty shocking for me, when you look at Black men in the 2020 election, 18% of them voted for Trump, and 8% of Black women voted for Donald Trump. Here's another stat that'll shock you. Donald Trump was able to bring in the highest percentage of the non-white vote for a Republican candidate since 1960. So to say that this is all about racism, I think it just gives you this very simplistic, knee-jerk, black and white answer, when again, there are other issues at play. We really need to do an in-depth analysis on Joe Biden and where he fell short. And I'm sure that the Zerlina Maxwells of the world are rolling their eyes and they hate these types of conversations, but it is important. So Democrats, I'm going to be clear, have taken the Black vote for granted. Now, in the general election, there was this ridiculous narrative about how Joe Biden is this great unifier, whereas Donald Trump is this horrendous racist guy. But remember, Joe Biden is the one who passed the crime bill in the 1990s, which imprisoned an entire generation of Black people, whereas Donald Trump did pass criminal justice reform. The beginning of the Democratic primary started with Joe Biden getting confronted by Kamala Harris, his now VP, for his views on busing and how he was so willing to work with the most racist Republicans decades ago in order to defeat busing bills. You think that Black people just forget about that? No, that is an issue. And if the campaigners, the surrogates for Biden go out there and they pretend as though it doesn't exist, it doesn't mean that it's erased from the record. It still exists. And so The Democratic Party has, in my opinion, for several election cycles, exploited social justice issues in order to rally the black vote. But when push comes to shove, what do they do when they're in power? Do they actually pass criminal justice reform? Do they do anything about the disgusting water situation in Flint, Michigan? Do they do any of that stuff? No, they don't. Flint, Michigan is still dealing with unclean water, and that is a problem. You can't just pretend like you care about these issues and then turn around and abandon the people who voted for you as soon as you're in a position of power. And we've seen that happen over and over again. And so these inequalities that are fueled by neoliberal ideology persist, and it is a real problem. And Americans are feeling the consequences of that. Americans are certainly feeling the consequences of that right now as the pandemic rages on. Tens of millions of Americans are still unemployed, and we still haven't seen another round of stimulus. This time around, the party has done the exact same thing that we saw during Hillary Clinton's campaigning in 2016. They decided to ignore the economic issues that speak to a broad base of voters, and instead they focused on nonsense like how we need to unify as a country. That was literally the only significant message coming out of the Biden campaign. Here's a little taste of it.
I'm going to bring all these interests together. Peaceful protesters, police chiefs, police officers, the police unions, as well as the civil rights groups in the White House, and sit down and decide what are the things that need to be done to improve and help police officers. I'm the only one who's talked about increasing police budgets.
I'm the only one who's talking about increasing police budgets. Biden, if you paid close attention, campaigned as a moderate Republican. And it is disastrous to have someone who both admits that climate change, for instance, is a real problem, is a real threat to our existence, but then on the other hand, defends fracking vociferously on the debate stage. I think that's a huge issue. Biden's campaign failures were also reflected in down-ballot races, which resulted in Democrats failing to take control of the Senate. And several Democratic incumbents also lost their re-election bids. As Ken Klippenstein, a reporter from The Nation, put it, when you frame your campaign as a narrow referendum on Trump, as opposed to his party's governing philosophy, defeating Trump but not the Senate GOP seems like a natural outcome. And honestly, I couldn't agree more with Ken Klippenstein. I mean, we've talked about this on the show. Biden is going to skew or slant his political policies in the direction of which group essentially helps him materially with his candidacy, with his election, with this election. And that's the Lincoln Project. These are never Trump Republicans, Republicans from the Bush era who have no interest in Medicare for all, who have no interest in doing something about income and wealth inequality in the country, who have no interest in doing anything substantive when it comes to police brutality or racial tensions in this country. But they do want to get Trump out of office. And that's one of the reasons why Biden's whole message was just this superficial, hey, we need to unify nonsense, while at the same time supporting the same types of Republican policies that you would see in a Bush administration. Policies that support fracking, policies that don't do enough when it comes to climate change. Now, to give you a sense of how much this hurt down-ticket candidates. House Democrats, for instance, lost 7 seats in battleground districts, including in South Carolina, New Mexico, and Iowa. Democrats also lost 2 seats in South Florida, including one that was hardly on their radar, which some Democrats blame on the potency of socialism attacks in the Cuban American stronghold. So what they're referring to there is Representative Shalala from Florida, who lost her re-election bid. No one saw that coming. And of course, Democrats have taken the wrong lessons from that loss. They think, oh my gosh, they called us socialists, and that's why we're hurting so much right now in these congressional races. But here's the thing. Republicans are going to call you socialists no matter what. Republicans are going to call you whatever they want, whenever they want, whether there's evidence or no evidence. They did that with Obama. They've done it with pretty much every Democratic candidate. They do it with their political opponents because they don't care about what the truth is. They don't care what you've campaigned on. They don't care what you stand for. If they think calling you a socialist is going to hurt your chances of getting elected or reelected, they will call you a socialist. That is what they do. The way that you fight that is by, first of all, how about some offense politics? We never see that with the Democratic Party. But more importantly, you fight that by having a clear, consistent message that communicates policies that are widely popular in this country, that resonate with a broad base of voters. Because honestly, when it comes to name calling, I would argue that the electorate doesn't care about that if what they're hearing from the candidate is something that actually appeals to their material needs and interests. And so in response, Democrats blame their failures on the left. And of course, we saw that coming. Democratic Representative Abigail Spanberger criticized some of her fellow Democrats for support of defunding police departments after a string of deaths of Black people during arrests or shootings by law enforcement personnel. Spanberger, let me give you more, on the Democratic caucus call said, "We lost races we shouldn't have lost. Defund police almost cost me my race because of an attack ad. Don't say socialism ever again. Need to get back to the basics." And apparently she was yelling as she was communicating this. Now, I would argue that defund the police is not necessarily something that's closely tied to socialism, right? I would argue that people who identify as democratic socialists in this country are supportive of that movement. But what I do find interesting is that Abigail Spanberger, who is part of a party that exploits social justice issues only for election purposes, is now saying that we need to abandon social justice issues. We need to abandon talking about racism in America because it hurt us in our elections. Okay, so then what are you going to focus on if you also refuse to talk about the economic issues that are relevant to Americans' lives today? They're setting themselves up for disaster. And luckily, Representative Rashida Tlaib did respond to this. Tlaib saying, "Before we make painful statements, we need to wait and see how the numbers come down. Feels like I'm being asked to be quiet, and we need to appeal to certain people, and that's not right." She also said, and this is important, they called Obama worse. They called him a Muslim, a socialist. You can blame these words, but if it wasn't on BLM, would have been something else. And she's absolutely right about that. If you can recall, back in 2008, Hillary Clinton released an image of Barack Obama wearing a turban. She did this during the Democratic primary in 2008 in an attempt to defeat him. But guess what? It did not work. Why didn't it work? Well, because Obama actually had a message that appealed to voters. And in fact, he won states that Joe Biden didn't even come close to winning. So, Kale, I'm going to skip ahead and go to the first Obama video because I want the audience to remember what Obama campaigned on in 2008. This is his speech kicking off his candidacy in 2008. Let's take a look at what his message was.
For the past 6 years, we've been told that our mounting debts don't matter. We've been told that the anxiety Americans feel about rising healthcare costs and stagnant wages are an illusion. We've been told that climate change is a hoax. We've been told that tough talk and an ill-conceived war can replace diplomacy and strategy and foresight. And when all else fails, when Katrina happens, or the death toll in Iraq mounts, we've been told that our crises are somebody else's fault. We're distracted from our real failures and told to blame the other party, or gay people, or immigrants. And as people have looked away in disillusionment and frustration, we know what's filled the void. The cynics, the lobbyists, the special interests, who've turned our government into a game only they can afford to play.
Well, Obama actually went on to beat Hillary Clinton in the primary, of course, but he also went on to win 365 electoral votes in 2008. Gee, I wonder why. I wonder why a biracial man with the name Barack Hussein Obama was able to win both the popular vote and the Electoral College by such a wide margin in 2008. Maybe it had something to do with his message. His message was about the bread and butter issues that Americans care about, the issues that impact their lives every single day. the issues that the Democratic Party has actually completely abandoned since then. And to be clear, as many of you already know, Campaign Obama was very different from President Obama. So while he campaigned on that message, he then went on to bail out Wall Street while refusing to bail out Main Street. Many Americans were left behind economically, and that anger, unfortunately, did fester, which led to someone like Donald Trump eventually getting elected. But again, his message in 2008 was one that focused on the inequalities that make Americans' lives so miserable. And when he ran for re-election again, Obama decided to tap into very similar messaging. Take a look.
The challenge we faced for over a decade is that harder work hasn't led to higher incomes. It's that bigger profits haven't led to better jobs. Governor Romney doesn't seem to get that. He doesn't seem to understand that maximizing profits by whatever means necessary, whether through layoffs or outsourcing or tax avoidance or union busting, might not always be good for the average American or for the American economy. Why else would he want to spend trillions more on tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans?
So as you guys know, in 2012, he was able to beat Mitt Romney, receiving 332 of the electoral votes. And it was a populist economic message. It appeals to people, again, because it has to do with the issues that impact their lives every single day. But unfortunately, again, in the age of the Lincoln Project and these never Trump Republicans moving over to the Democratic Party, Democrats have largely abandoned this message. They've abandoned these issues, and it is hurting them. What's also hurting them is their unwillingness to acknowledge their mistakes, their unwillingness to learn any valuable lessons, both from 2016 and this current election. And so if you look at polling, and I think that this polling is important, even when it comes to conservative voters, many of them want the policies that were proposed by a candidate like Bernie Sanders. Here's an example from September 30th of 2020, just a few months ago. The poll indicated that more Americans on both sides of the political spectrum want a higher wage, higher minimum wage. It's not that hard. It's not that hard. Did Biden campaign on increasing wages? No. He had something in his website about it. He wants to increase the wage to $15 an hour. But did he actually campaign on it? Was it an issue that was front and center in his campaigning? It wasn't. Let me give you more. The same survey found that before COVID-19 hit, 48% of people who identify as Republicans said they wanted a higher minimum wage. Now nearly 62% of GOP supporters said that's a good idea. So even Republican voters want higher wages. And all you need to do is look at states like Florida, which rejected Biden. They voted for Trump. But when it came to a ballot initiative to increase the minimum wage, it won overwhelming support by voters in Florida. These are issues that matter to people across the board. But Biden decided he didn't want to campaign on it. So what about healthcare? What we've heard from corporate Democrats is that, oh, no, Medicare for all is a campaign killer. We can't do it. They're going to call us socialists. Oh, my God, what are we going to do if they call us socialists? Well, 56% of Americans think providing access to affordable healthcare coverage for all Americans is the responsibility of the federal government, and 2/3 favor the creation of a national government-administered health insurance plan similar to Medicare for all that would be available to all Americans. But the Democratic Party, again, has gone on to learn all the wrong lessons from this recent election. According to Politico, Pelosi and her top lieutenants had a stark warning for Democrats on Thursday. Swing too far left, and they're all but certain to blow their chances in the Georgia runoff that will determine which party controls the Senate. So just to give you some context on what that election is, or what that race is, GOP Senator David Perdue is expected to face off against Democratic challenger Jon Ossoff, and GOP Senator Kelly Loeffler will take on Democratic candidate Raphael Warnock. But honestly, Pelosi doesn't even need to cite this excuse for why she doesn't want the left to have any type of influence within the party. She doesn't believe in what leftists want. She doesn't believe in delivering what Americans need. And I think that was abundantly clear in how she failed in passing another round of stimulus for the American people during this devastating pandemic. Also, I got to give you the statement from Jim Clyburn, who says, if we're going to run on Medicare for all, defund the police, socialize medicine, we're not going to win. That's what he warned during a caucus call. Now, no mention in this Politico article about how Jim Clyburn is mostly funded by pharmaceutical companies and the private insurance industry, and so he knows where his bread is buttered, and that's where his priorities are, fighting against wildly popular policies like Medicare for all, because that's what his donors want him to do. So I think we really need to take a step back and understand that not only are Democrats learning the wrong lessons from this election, they have a vested interest in learning the wrong lessons. They don't want to upset their donors. They want to keep having that campaign money flow in from the private insurance industry, from all these corporations who want to keep their taxes low. And so they will fight the left as hard as they possibly can. And I think anyone who disagrees with that statement is being incredibly naive. The question is, will the left over the next 4 years organize effectively enough to provide the right solutions, the right answers to a failed Biden presidency? Because I have no doubt that Biden will refuse to do what's right in tackling inequality in the country, in doing something about police brutality in this country. I have no doubt that he will do nearly nothing when it comes to climate change. And we're going to feel the consequences of that. We need to organize. We need to understand power. We need to stop nitpicking and moralizing, which turns off voters across the board. And if we hyper-focus on the bread and butter issues and how our solutions are the best, I think we can win. I think we can primary Kamala Harris in 4 years. But we need to have a clear, strong message, and we need to fight almost in a militant way to get that message out there. And most importantly, we need to know our enemies and why they're our enemies. We are not going to be able to work with corporate Democrats. Corporate Democrats, again, have a vested interest in fighting us. So it's time that we effectively fight back.
I love that you're already talking about primarying Kamala Harris in 4 years. Like
we have
we're
to.
We're just assuming that it's going to be Kamala and not Biden in 4 years.
He said it. Biden says that he doesn't want to run after his first term is up, and so that puts Kamala Harris in the position to run against whoever.
If he's still alive,
I mean,
he's not going to resign.
That's the thing. Biden's like hanging in there, I guess, but I don't know. We'll see what happens in 4 years. The presidency is tough on presidents, like physically.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it all plays out. But look, let me also note, it is historic that we have the first female, and she's also Black vice president. I don't want to take away from that. But for me, and I guess this gets me in trouble time to time, I think that representation matters, but it also matters that we have the right representation policy-wise, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where I stand on that. I'm not trying to take away from how historic the moment is, but that moment being historic is not going to prevent people from getting evicted from their homes. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, totally. And it's infuriating to see Jim Clyburn, for example, who is one of the most responsible people for destroying Bernie Sanders, by the way, to saying that if we run on Medicare for all, we'll lose. If you look at the actual results, Democratic, like this is a tweet from Jonathan Cohn, Democratic co-sponsors of Medicare for all won in swing districts, all won the re-election campaigns. Jared Goldman in Maine won his re-election campaign, despite the fact that he's in a Republican +2 district, and Kirkpatrick in Arizona, Mike Levin in California, Katie Porter in California, all won re-election despite being in swing districts or in districts that lean Republican. And they're literally they're co-sponsors of Medicare for All. They're not like Bernie-crats by any stretch of the imagination. They're, Katie Porter is kind of like a bold progressive type person, but the other ones are just kind of standard Dems who've just signed on to Medicare for All. And it didn't kill them in these swing districts. So like that narrative is just completely wrong. It just has not supported by any sort of data at all. And it's incredibly frustrating. And then the other thing that I wanted to react to from your commentary was watching all these speeches that Democrats love to do about unity. Obama did it, like the famous, there ain't no blue America or red America, there's just the United States of America. And I get that impulse from like a presidential nominee, you want to be the president of all Americans and stuff like that. And Biden did that as well, like I'm not going to be super mean to Republicans and all that stuff. And I get that impulse, but the problem with that kind of rhetoric, especially in today's time, in which the country is so polarized and divided, is that when you promise unity and then unity doesn't happen, mostly because there's another thing called the Republican Party who understands that their strategy needs to be full-on confrontation and undermining of the Democratic Party agenda at all times, on all fronts, forever. Is that then unity is impossible. So then you failed on your own terms, right? You have not united the country. I mean, people, like if you look at voters' disillusionment with Obama, a lot of them, outside from the fact that he didn't deliver on any of the sort of economic populism that he ran on, was that the country felt more divided than ever. And because he ran on unity, he failed on those terms, right? So he failed. You know what I mean? In that sense. So the Republicans understand that they need to be confrontational all the time. They Republicans never, ever, even rhetorically reach out to Democrats. Like it's like the Democrats are saying like, I love to work with Lindsey Graham, or I love to, he's my friend in the Senate and we can get things done or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Like that does not flow in the opposite direction ever. It's like, I loved John McCain, or I love Lindsey Graham, or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Like Dianne Feinstein hugging Lindsey Graham after the Amy Coney Barrett nominations. Whereas then the Republicans turn around and it's like, Hillary Clinton eats children, and the Democrats are all Marxist demons who rose up from a sulfur pit in the ground. And it's like that disconnect is just so jarring to people. So that's the problem. Is like politics is about conflict. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not just jarring, it's infuriating. Because what it does is it draws a false equivalency between Democratic voters, and really think about what, and I'm not saying all of them, but what's pretty prevalent in the Trump side of the electorate. I mean, the insane QAnon conspiracy theorists, like, how are you going to tell me that, we need to unite with this group of people who go around calling their political opponents pedophiles? That's what they do. That's how they try to destroy people. They destroy their political opponents, or attempt to, by calling them pedophiles with no evidence. There's no legitimacy behind those claims. Like, how are you supposed to unite with those people? So it's not, I don't care about uniting. I'm not interested in that. Mm-hmm. But what I do want to draw more attention to is that there are issues that unite us, right? There are issues that I think most Americans agree on. We all want the same things. We all want to be able to comfortably pay our bills. We want to be able to have a good time with our families. We want to be able to, work in a way where it's not completely taking over our entire lives. We want to be able to have one full-time job instead of have like 5 part-time jobs in this like ridiculous gig economy. People want the same things. They just want to have happy, comfortable lives. And the fact that the Democratic Party has abandoned that and instead pursued this avenue of, we're going to go around judging everyone as racist, homophobic, sexist, whatever. And then what do? Once they're in positions of power? Do they do anything to improve the lives of various minority groups who have been dealing with discrimination and inequality? No, they don't. And it's become very clear to them that their votes have been taken for granted. And so again, I go back to Abigail Spanberger, who's like, no, don't talk about defund the police. It hurt me. Maybe you're a sucky candidate.
She was a CIA agent.
Well, yeah. Yeah. So how about you take some personal responsibility instead of crying about, again, incredibly popular policies that you didn't even campaign on?
Yeah.
Quit your crying and your moaning. Republicans are going to call you names. Welcome to adulthood.
Yeah.
Grow up and try to find an effective campaign strategy that speaks to the issues that people care about. She didn't do that. So she doesn't get to whine about it during a Democratic caucus call. Anyway,
and this idea that in order to diffuse Republican attacks, you have to become more Republican. It's just so absurd on its face because they're always going to prefer the real thing. They're always going to prefer the real thing. Like Amy McGrath is basically a Republican who ran against Mitch McConnell, right? Amy McGrath is basically a Republican in every single thing that she stands for. She is even more to the right than like someone like Joe Biden or whatever. She's a Republican with a Democrat label attached to her name. Okay, why would a voter in Kentucky vote for Amy McGrath over Mitch McConnell if they believed in Republican policies? If they believe in Republican policies, Mitch McConnell is the most effective Republican legislator of all time, probably. Like, no one has delivered more Republican policies for their base than Mitch McConnell. So why would anyone vote him out to replace him with a worse Republican? No, that's just never going to work.
It's so dumb.
It's so dumb.
It's so dumb. But again, they've learned the wrong lessons. And maybe we'll have a little bit of a breather in regard to the chaos we've experienced over the last 4 years. But we should be worried about the midterm elections. And we should certainly be worried about 2024. Yeah. Because if this is the lesson that they took away, if they think the 10 never Trump Republicans who exist in this country are, indicative of what the Democratic electorate wants, we're in for a world of trouble. There's no question.